Kerski. He is doing his presentation on why data quality matters now more than ever. He is the educational manager for Esri in Broomfield. Let's give a warm welcome for Mr. Kerski.
Folks, good to see you all here. I would love to chat with you for a while about data quality, and here's why. What Matt was saying this morning, I think, is really pertinent. Because GIS is changing, right? It's changing in several significant ways. Now, feel free to get a hold of me at any time. I do, as Joan said, serve at Esri as on our education team. So our education team is focused on helping university, community college, K-12, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, 4-H, anybody involved in education be successful with teaching, learning, research, and education, but also the campus administrator types. Campus safety, infrastructure mapping, all that sort of thing. So that is really the goal of our team. I also teach here at the University of Denver. And no surprise to you all, coming to this, that I teach a course on spatial data. And so this topic is really near and dear to my heart. One of the reasons why I think it's important to talk about these topics is what Matt was talking about this morning, and that is that the world of GIS is changing, as we know. I'll refer to some of these things in a bit, but I think there are several different paradigm shifts that we're undergoing right now as GIS professionals and other people interested in geospatial technology. First of all, we've got the technical changes, right? Many of us who have been around for a while, and remember there was evolution of where GIS in the Rockies was. There was the time in the mid-90s, some of you are like, mid-90s, Joseph. We were over in the Regency, and it was like 70s. It was like paneling and shag carpeting. I wanted to bring my Tom Jones records and have a big medallion. But the point is that GIS in the Rockies has changed, but the nice thing is that we've got a really good mix of folks here, right? We've got some seasoned GIS professionals, we've got people just coming into the industry, and so you folks know, even if you're new to the industry, as well as I do, that based on what Matt said and based on what your own observations are, that we've had this major paradigm shift. Many instructors on the GIS education side are asking me, Joseph, I'm teaching GIS 101. I'm not even sure what I teach in GIS 101 anymore. Do I use online? Do I have the students go out in the field and collect data? So even the educational world is rocking, right, with this paradigm shift in the technologies, right? Moving to software as a service. Yes, there are still desktop tools. Yes, there are still going to be desktop tools in the future. But it's increasingly, as you know, a hybrid world. We've got mobile, desktop, and web. And that's an exciting time. I think it's an exciting time for GIS. By the way, I'm really glad that you're in this session. I'm just the warm-up band for Peter Batty, whom I have enormous respect for. I'm like Circle opening for the Beatles in '66. Peter is the Beatles, and some of you are like, Circle? Who even is that? So I don't remember who the warm-up band was. It was the Circle. But the point is that Peter and I are very focused on this whole realm that we're talking about here today, and that is why this stuff matters and how it's changing and how we can grapple with it as a community. Now, we've talked about the technical aspects of the changes and a little bit of the instructional aspects, but I'd like you to think about the societal aspects here as well. And that is, I'd just like to submit these 5 forces to have you think about, especially if you don't have a social life like me and you're sitting around at home this evening and you're thinking about, those 5 forces. Joseph, I'm not sure I agree with that those are the 5, but just bear with me for a moment. Let's think about these. First of all, we've got geo-awareness. More and more people in society are actually aware of the things that you and I as geotechnology, geo-enviro types have long cared about, right? If you spend a lot of time on the RTD or airport shuttles or in libraries, people are talking about climate, they're talking about water, they're talking about traffic, they're talking about land cover change and water, energy, etc. All of those things that you and I as geo-professionals cared about, the general public, hello, they're starting to care about those things. So there's a growing awareness, which I think brings us to an unprecedented opportunity in our field. And there's also geo-enablement. I used to come home from the USGS, where I worked for, basically from the Cretaceous to the Holocene, a long period of time. Anyway, I came home from the USGS and would say, I got to look at aerial photos all day at work. Yes! Now, how many people have looked at satellite images in the time that you and I have been chatting? Thousands? Millions? Tens of millions? So people are being enabled with some of these tools. Not every single tool that you and I use, but many of the tools that you and I use. The general public is now engaging in some of those tools, right? They are starting to be enabled to use to make everyday decisions smarter, faster, better, etc. Again, bringing us to, I think, a great opportunity as geospatial professionals in lots of ways that we'll chat about in the 3 hours that we have together. Just kidding. The geotechnologies themselves have migrated, right? They have evolved. Now, I don't pine for those old clunky days. It's great to be able to go and first of all, use a graphical user interface to come up with, I want to buffer this feature, pick from a pull down by this amount, with this feature. And here's my result, I'm going to name it this, and I'm going to put it in this folder. I love being able to do that. But again, kind of like the data quality issue that we'll focus on here in a moment, with all of those tools at our fingertips, I want people, not just students, but people in the geospatial profession that are using these tools to really think about what they're doing at each step, right? And then have a hypothesis in your mind. What's that map going to look like when you're done with these procedures? Don't just click, 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 done, finish, right? And go on your way. What do you think it's going to look like when you're done with that? The citizen science, I submit to you all, is the fourth of the 5 major forces acting to bring us as geospatial professionals to this opportune time. And what do I mean by that? Well, citizen science goes back. When you look at the late 19th century, for example, what community was doing citizen science? People that were out there on the landscape observing things. What community in particular stands out to you? The birders. How many of you are birders? Think back 130 years. The birders have long been really meticulous on their data collection. The species, the location, the time of day, the color of the bird, etc., etc. So now we've got more and more people interested in citizen science, in part because they realize that they can, A, contribute to the scientific community with their observations that's actually going to go somewhere and be used in organizations, nonprofit, business, government agencies, etc. And also because they can map it. And mapping is sort of an instant gratification these days with collecting data, right? I can gather data on invasive species, or tree cover, or litter on campus. Well, there's no litter here at DU. It's all pristine. But the point is that we can map things with citizen science, pine beetle infestation, and all the rest of it, right? There's lots of opportunities there that people have, again, to engage in these geospatial tools that you and I love. And finally, storytelling. Now, maps have been used to tell stories for thousands of years, right? Remember Terra Incognita used to be on maps, right? We're still discovering things on our planet, under our planet, above our planet, and even in other celestial bodies, right? Ganymede, Mars, etc. So we're still using maps to discover things. And we also can use maps as powerful communication tools, for example, with web mapping applications, and one subset of web mapping applications are story maps. How many of you have made a story map? Nice. So story maps integrate multimedia with a live set or sets of web maps. And other people that are not in our field are starting to use story maps. So I'm working, for example, with New York University. And they started with a project on a certain train line that went from Queens to Manhattan. They highlighted all the different languages that were spoken. It was over 100 languages on that train line, all the ethnic groups, all the history of the people that were traveling on that train line. They only had one map in that story map. It was mostly interviews and photographs of the people telling the stories. Well, I wasn't about to say, well, no, you need to start with GIS over here. You need to start with, talking about metadata and map projections. I'm not saying that stuff's not important, but no, they started over here. And so I'm using that as an opportunity to say, there's a whole ecosystem behind this called geographic information science, really. And so to get them interested in the broader picture. So storytelling is a nice way of more and more people becoming interested in what we're all about and why this all matters through those easy to use but powerful ways of not just telling stories, but telling stories through a geospatial focus. So I just want to have you chew on that for a bit, that these are the 5 forces that are deeply impacting data volume and data quality, as well as impacting the field of GIS in general. Right? Think of the amount of data now coming out from citizen science. Think of, have you ever used OpenStreetMap? So for example, if someone were to tell you way back in the 1990s, hey, there's going to be two encyclopedias. One is going to be called, Encarta from Microsoft, and it's going to be on these CDs, and it's going to be awesome. And there's this other thing called Wikipedia, and people are going to contribute to that. Well, probably most of us would have said, well, the Encarta thing is going to take off. I mean, that's a reputable, organization, and well, the Wikipedia took off, right? So citizen science is contributing tons of data also to the geospatial world, as well as these other things. So story mapping, for example, there back in April, the 100,000th story map was made. So again, huge amount of attention to this. How many of you have taken a MOOC, Massive Open Online Course? So the three that I helped Penn State with, one of those is called Mapping in the Geospatial Revolution. 95,000 people have taken 3 installments of that MAPS MOOC. Now sure, MOOCs have a history of, not many people finish, but even if 20% of those finished, we've got tons of people thinking about maps as more than just reference documents, right? Ooh, maps are not just where is Yemen, where is Saudi Arabia, etc., right? No, they're tools of discovery, as you know. So again, it's bringing a lot of attention to our field. And so one of the things that I want to chat with you about is let's talk about 4 ways that data quality matters. And they relate to these 5 forces that I talked about earlier. Number 1 is maps are representations of reality. Oh, Joseph, for Pete's sake, I knew that way back in elementary school. Well, but I think we forget that when we're so used to data set A, data set B, data set C. Oh gosh, it's all right at my fingertips. Mash that up into a map, look at it, analyze it. Do you know where all that data that you input came from? It may look good. What if it's not well documented? Or what if it goes down? So I was using some data sets from NOAA, and I love NOAA. There's some NOAA people here. Awesome. But it went down in the middle of tornado season. It was the tornado data set. Right? It was served in ArcGIS Online. All of a sudden that link migrated somewhere else. I had no idea where it went. And I was in front of people, teaching a class. Uh-oh, the tornado data is down. Now I was just using it for teaching data. What if I was actually using it to, do some sort of, hazard mitigation or alerting people, etc. It's not good to have that kind of thing that we depend on go down. So, benefits and also challenges of working in our cloud-based hybrid world. But maps are representations of reality. So, for example, what I've got here is I'm actually standing on, I don't know if we have audio, but I'm standing on the deciduous coniferous tree line, okay? And is it a line? Well, no, it's not a line. It's actually a zone, right? So I'm up in northern Wisconsin. Who's from Wisconsin? Anybody? Cool. So I'm up there in northern Wisconsin. This is the exact spot shown on most maps of North America as the line between the coniferous and the deciduous trees. Now, as you can see from this video, and I'll spare you the audio, but as you can see from just me walking around, it's actually a zone, right? It's not a line. We get so used to looking at features, don't we, that are hard and fast boundaries. But some things might be better characterized as zones. For example, this one. Should we characterize it as a raster data set where this cell over here, maybe 10 kilometers south of where I was standing, is 90% deciduous, and the one where I'm standing is maybe 50%-ish deciduous, and the one to the north of there, maybe 10 kilometers to the north, is 20% deciduous and then 80% coniferous. See, that's the kind of thing I want people to think about. I don't want okay, we've got this line. It is a line. No. A lot of the stuff that we're looking at is not a line or a point or a polygon, right? The maps are representations of reality. So I just want to challenge you with this. How many other data sets do we tend to see as having firm boundaries when the boundaries are not really firm at all in reality? For example, the boundary between wetlands and open water was originally interpreted on some databases from land cover data or from a satellite image or an aerial image. Even contour lines were often interpreted originally from stereo aerial pairs. Some of you may remember those days. And each data set was collected at a certain scale, right, with certain equipment and software, with certain audience in mind, and certain margins of error that the organization established. Do we know what those margins of error were, or are, or why they matter? So maps are representations of reality, very useful representations, right? That's why we all have been enamored by them, but representations nonetheless. Question for you. Kansas-Nebraska border or Kansas-Oklahoma border? Oh, you're thinking spatially. Kansas-Oklahoma border. be critical of your data, even when it is your own. So let me illustrate that one. Now, thanks to mobile technologies and the things that we talked about, it's very easy to upload maps into ArcGIS Online and other web mapping platforms. So this has led to OpenStreetMap and so on and so forth. But let's talk about what happens when this sort of thing goes on. So, okay, I went out with my GPS receiver in this case. I wasn't actually using a smartphone app at all. I was using a GPS receiver, and I've got this sort of funny thing going off up to the north there. Well, it was right when I exited the building, right? So my coordinates were off, obviously. The GPS constellation wasn't fully engaged by my unit. The other things that were augmenting the signal were not quite kicked in. So after about 5 minutes, it realized that I was walking around Kendrick Lake in Lakewood. I also, this is a geeky little aside, notice I was drawing GIS down here. You know, resolution matters. I had to draw it fairly big, walking in big steps. But the point is that you got to be careful when you're out there. So for example, here, I'm out in Southern California now, and I'm out here on this trail, and as you can see, on the way up, I'm a little about 9 meters off. On the way down, I'm about 1 meter off. So the point is that why on the way up, now this is Chaparral, Southern California, steep terrain, could have affected as I'm walking down, right? The GPS constellation, maybe most of it was behind me, got a steep hill, maybe blocking some of those satellites, but all kinds of things going on where we just really need to be critical of the data. Same exact trails, same exact day, 2 different GPS tracks. And this is a nice illustration, I think, of the power of these WebGIS technologies. I've got it embedded in my presentation, right? Very cool, very easy to do. Very nice. Okay, so the map is live and so on. So again, simple examples. You know I'm in education, so really nothing that I'm doing with these tools and with these data sets is going to cause anybody to lose property or to have their lives endangered. But many of you are in those kinds of professions, so I think it's even more important for you to keep in mind and instill in the employees that you're training that, yeah, we've got data at our fingertips. We've got these wonderful tools at our fingertips, but data quality still matters. And I'm hoping to, if you don't mind, just impart a couple more examples, and then we'll have some comments, questions, and complaints, and so on and so forth. What about misleading data? Okay, so I have been teaching about, one of my passions is to get GIS beyond the walls of certain departments on a university campus or certain classes in a K-12 classroom. It's too good to just be in geography. It's too good just to be in geosciences or earth sciences or biology. You got to get it out there into different disciplines. So one of my missions is to get it into schools of public health and so on. So one of the lessons that I have is that I have the participants in workshops create a choropleth map of Lyme disease in Rhode Island. And so I actually mapped that, in this case, with Esri Maps for Office. So I had it in Excel, I pushed it up to ArcGIS Online, and then I've got it right here. So this is by town, and for those of you that know New England geography, these towns they're sort of a cross between a county and a city, so they're a fairly decent sized area, but it's Rhode Island, so it's not really that huge. One of my colleagues has a shirt that says, Rhode Island, 2% larger at low tide. I love that. I love that. Anyway, the point is that we mapped the data from the 1990s, and that's what you see here. This is Lyme disease incidences, so you can see some patterns and so on and so forth. And then I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be grand, let's just pull that back up here, wouldn't it be grand to update that data? So this is around 2010, 2011, with the decade of the 2000s. So we started mapping it based on data that we got from the same data site, the state of Rhode Island public health site, and all of the towns had shown a marked decline. That's interesting. That's really good news. I'm glad there's less Lyme disease up there. I know someone in my neighborhood that actually has it, and he couldn't work. It's a serious thing. So the point is that we started digging in deeper, and it actually, I know this sounds so 20th century, we actually had to make a telephone call to the people that are providing the data, and we said, this is interesting, we're mapping these patterns, and it turns out the reason why they declined is that the funding for that agency declined, and they had been collecting less data. So it looked like it was better in the 2000s. How do you find that stuff out? That's not in the metadata, folks. That's the kind of thing that if you're kind of wondering about patterns, and this is why, I've got another presentation about the 5 qualities that I think are most important for geospatial professionals. And the number one was not metadata, it wasn't datums and stuff like that, which I also recognize are important, but it was being curious, asking questions, digging deep, really thinking about what you're doing and investigating the data, which is what we're focused on here. So it took a phone call or two to get at the issue, but that was pretty sobering because we thought, gosh, we could have just blazed on thinking, gosh, isn't it great that the incidences have all declined? But it turned out to be, sadly, not the case. In fact, the public health people told me that they had increased. So another one is scale matters. Now, we've got these tools at our fingertips where we can zoom in to 1 to 500 scale, right? And isn't that great that we're able to do that? I've got this geeky video on my website that is at the Pecora USGS conference, way back in the year 2000, when some of you were probably in elementary school. The point is that it was the first time we went from the globe all the way down to a neighborhood on a satellite image. And this was before Google Earth. This was way back. This was a different tool. Wow, this is awesome. We can zoom in. But now the point is here, folks, is that you know as well as I do that you can zoom into 1 to 1,000 scale. Well, what if that data wasn't collected at that scale? Doesn't mean you can't zoom in, but does the data quality actually get better as you zoom in? No, it doesn't get better. But I think people that are new to GIS or people that aren't thinking about it, they have this perception that, you know what, I can produce this map at 1 to 500 or 1 to 1,000. I've got some data sets that may be produced at 1 to 24,000 or 1 to 100,000 even. And I can represent those in that large scale map. That doesn't mean that the data is accurate to that scale. So the point is here that being a geospatial minded person, you probably would have done the same thing, but after I was at the American Geographical Society Library in the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, oh, what a great place that is. You need to make a pilgrimage. They've got like the von Humboldt map of Venezuela from 1805. And anyway, after I was there, I made a trip up to Manitowoc and walked on the pier out on Lake Michigan with visions of Gordon Lightfoot songs, sort of running through my mind. Anyway, the point is that it was fascinating to be up there. And after I mapped my data, which this was the pier, no railings. So you get to the end of that and this is a navigational device, use at your own risk, crumbling concrete. It was fascinating. But the point was that if I look at my map, it looks like I'm walking on the water. Because the base map is not of sufficient resolution. It doesn't have the pier in it. So again, the scale matters and your base maps matter. Now, just a note on base maps, we were chatting earlier, a colleague and I, about satellite images and aerials. That's another thing that I just wanted to lay in here, is that those aren't perfect either, right? They've been geo-rectified. There's all kinds of things that you can learn in remote sensing courses, right, about this. And those of you that are photogrammetrists or know photogrammetrists, you know that, hey, just because it looks like that is the ground truth, right? There are errors and imperfections in all kinds of data, including aerial photos and satellite imagery, and including high-resolution UAV drone data. So again, just keep those things in mind, folks, when you're working with new employees or even existing employees on your different professional development, maybe trainings that you're conducting. So the point is that paying close attention to your data and knowing its sources, which should lead to a larger discussion on the importance of scale and resolution in any project involving maps and GIS. So, in my case, even though I chose a larger scale, the pier did not appear on the Runkeeper application's base map in 2012. It does now, however, and it also appears in the base map in ArcGIS Online. So, most of the GIS literature, as conferences like this and proceedings from conferences and journals, blogs, etc., they mostly focus on success stories, right? But I think it's important for us as the community to realize there are challenges out there, even though we have it really good now, don't we? In terms of data, tools, standards, portals, right? We've got the Boulder County data sitting online, and we can just pull. I mean, it's just one. It's a wonderful. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. But I think data quality still matters, and it's also, I think, more important that we teach those concepts now because we have the cloud, because we have these things at our fingertips. It is even more important because in the old days, you really did have to kind of dig into the metadata a bit more. You can use data now, but without actually having to look at it. And in fact, I talked about story maps. We're always dinging on our story maps team. There's no metadata. So what if I create this wonderful story map? Yeah, unless I put it in the last slide in my story map or my last section in the story map, you can get a story map up online without putting any information about who made it and why. So again, it's just sort of the constant tapping on the doors of people that are creating tools, even our own story maps team. So one last note here. For example, last note on scale, there's data out there that were originally created from topographic maps. Now, I spent a lot of time at the USGS, and I had a grand time there. But, the USGS topo maps, the original ones were made as a cartographic product. So the railroad had precedence. The road was offset, so it would be visually appealing. If it was placed in its true scale on most topos, that road would be too close to the railroad for you to distinguish it with your eye. So it was offset. There were rules about offsetting. So, decades later, now we're using data produced from those, and we don't realize that, that road might not be right there. It might be 30 meters off of where it actually is on the landscape. Depending on your application, that 30 meters might be just fine, but maybe not if you're laying fiber optic cable or something like that, or a pipeline next to the road. So folks, with great opportunity becomes great responsibility. We've got, as I say, and as you well know, a vast array of data at our fingertips. Just don't get lulled into complacency and use a map or data set just because it is so easily accessible or because the symbology looks sharp. Right? Be sure to be critical of the data. Remember that with the ability to publish your data in the cloud, embed your web maps in web pages, or build communication tools like the story maps we talked about, you are reaching potentially a vastly larger audience than we traditionally had in our geospatial community, right? And so again, that is another reason. Remember my 5 forces and storytelling being one of them, citizen science being one of them, but we've got a bigger audience than we've ever had before. Yeah, you might not share your data with the world. That's fine. But your presentations, because people are more geo-aware than they've ever been before, they might be larger, even in just a presentation that you're giving to your local city council about what you're doing and why it's important. So check your data sources. By doing so, your map is more likely to be on firmer ground, and you're more likely to reduce any possible misinterpretation of your data. Who's read the book How to Lie with Maps? Yeah, many of you. Okay. Finally, practice what you preach about metadata. Right? We all breathe a sigh of relief when the data we are seeking is well populated, but are you, when you publish something and you've got to get it done by, I got to get it done right now. I don't have time to, you got to do it. You just got to do it. You've got to practice what you preach and populate that metadata. Now, on these topics of data quality and related data issues, my colleague and I wrote a book on this topic. It's called The GIS Guide to Public Domain Data. And because the book was published a couple years ago, we wanted to keep the conversation going. So we have a blog called Spatial Reserve where we talk about data quality. I know it sounds like, it sounds so boring, Joseph, but the point is that no, this is really relevant to our 21st century work with GIS. So for example, not too long ago, I wrote something on what Matt talked about this morning, Pokemon Go, GIS, and safety, actually. So we try to keep these topics pertinent, but we also talk about where do I get data from? What are the good data portals out there? How do I know if data is any good? So I wrote about geospatial information and the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations not too long ago. So have a look at that. Hopefully it's useful. Questions, comments, complaints, issues? Sir?
You touched on scale. That's something that I teach on as well, and it's difficult to teach. Do you have any recommendations or tips on how to get your head around, or teach people how to get your head around, the appropriateness of scale and data at certain scales? Like your GIS, for example, where you drew it in, you can zoom in on that and say, this is an appropriate scale. You zoom out, and if you can't see it, an example of that. I'm
Yep.
sure you probably have other ones.
Yeah, I do. And on that, one of those links in there, let me just, this isn't the end-all be-all, but this YouTube channel, which pretty much my mom and I look at, that's about it. No, but I've got 3,000 videos on there. I'm kind of passionate about this. And about 15 of those, and they're very short, about 15 of those have to do with teaching about scale. So I've got some examples in there, and I'd love to chat with you more about what more we can do with that. But I think having the zoomable tools inside a cloud-based environment is a huge help, because in the past we'd have to get that 1 to 100,000 scale map, the 1 to 24,000 scale, and I'm not saying that's not valuable, but now we've got some additional resources to teach about scale. I'll let Peter come up here because he is the man, and I appreciate you folks being here though. Thank you.